Hello, bonjour, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Stephen Sugar from the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy Board of Directors, and we are excited to share with you today's topic, Regulatory Modernization, PT's Reflection on a Journey to Amalgamation in British Columbia, Canada. The province of British Columbia has passed some legislation to modernize the framework for health professional regulation. Today, we have representatives from the British Columbia's regulatory body, and they'll discuss the history of amalgamation, including the lead up and transition approaches, as well as some decisions made. Diane Millett is a registrar and CEO of the College of Physical Therapists of British Columbia, and soon to be the registrar and CEO of the newly amalgamated College of Health Care Professionals of British Columbia. A physical therapist by education, Diane has spent much of her career working with health professionals, regulations across Canada and the United States. Diane is a current member of the board of directors of the Canadian Alliance of Physiotherapy Regulators. She has served on the board of Physiotherapy Education Accreditation Canada, the Canadian Physiotherapy Association, and the International Network of Physiotherapy Regulators in Special Olympics Alberta. Welcome, Diane. Joanne Bouchard completed her bachelor's in dietetics and is a research master at the University of Montreal, Quebec, Canada. In more recent years, she's completed a certificate in public leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School and is currently finishing a certificate in change management at UBC Saunders School of Business. Before turning her interest of professional regulation, she worked in various healthcare facilities as a registered dietitian. Joanne accumulates over a decade of experience of professional regulation in 2 Canadian provinces. She is currently the registrar of the College of Dietitians of British Columbia and the Chief Transition Officer for the Amalgamation Project. In this role, she oversees the implementation of government modernization initiative to amalgamate 11 healthcare regulatory colleges into 2 organizations. Prior to this appointment, she was the vice chair for the British Columbia Healthcare Regulators and the chair of the Alliance of Canadian Dietetic Regulatory Bodies. Welcome to both of you, and I will have you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will share the screen. And can I just get a thumbs up that people are seeing the presentation well? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you for having us. Diane and I are sharing the same office space today, which is the future office space of the amalgamated colleges. And we thought we were going to be together to do the presentation today. So we have a few slides, but we're hoping we have lots of time to discuss all together at the end and answer any of your questions. So who will the College of Health and Care of Professional of BC regulate on June 28th? At the start, it is 9 professions: audiologist, dietitian, hearing aid practitioner or hearing instrument practitioner, occupational therapist, optician, optometrist, physical therapist, psychologist, and speech language pathologist. It is also the organization that the government has signaled that would be the home to any new future regulated health profession in British Columbia. And so right now there are potentially the diagnostic and therapeutic profession who may become regulated in the near future, and also psychotherapy, who is currently actually out for consultation in the province. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of how amalgamation came to be in the province of British Columbia. And it started back in 2018 when there was somebody appointed and mandated by the Minister of Health to look into the performance of the College of Dental and Surgeon. And at the same time that this mandate was given, and the name of the person is Harry Caton. Most of you are probably familiar with him. Mr. Caton was also asked to look at the broader context of the health profession regulation framework in British Columbia, and if that framework was still responding to today's needs. So when that report was completed, there was two separate sections, a series of recommendations for the College of Dental Surgeons to implement, both at the governance level and also more generally about the college operation. And then there was also a big section regarding some recommendation to modernize the health regulatory framework. And amalgamation was one of the recommendations. It was specifically positioned to reduce the number of colleges to increase efficiency. Some of the comments made were regarding the smallest regulator in BC not having sufficient resources. For example, the College of Midwife were named in that report, and the College of Podiatrists, who had less than 500 registrants in the province. So in 2019, the government put out a paper for consultation where they were kind of asking for public input on a series of topics regarding their intent and direction to modernize the regulatory framework. And again, amalgamation was one of the topics that was out for consultation with different grouping proposed at that point, but kind of leaving it up to people to comment on it. And so a year later, in the midst of the pandemic, we got the final steering committee recommendation. The steering committee was comprised of different political parties. So I think it was a strategic move from government to ensure that if there was a turnover with election, that those recommendations would carry through and that project would continue to move forward. And in the 2020 report, the recommendation that came out moved from the initial consultation paper, because initially we were supposed to be one colleges with 11 organizations being combined, and so that was breaking into two, which resulted in the one that we just presented to you. And of course, there was also the Health Profession and Occupation Act, which is the umbrella legislation that is addressing the remaining of the modernization initiative. But today we'll focus a bit more on the amalgamation piece. In terms of amalgamation, we thought we would show you a little bit the history that followed that timeline that I just presented. So in 2019, the three nursing colleges completed their amalgamation, and it was the first one in the province. It was volunteer. So it is the three nursing colleges that initiated it. It took them 4 years to complete this, and it was combining licensed practical nurses, registered nurses, and psychiatric nurses. And as the report of government came out, and as I said, the College of Midwife was named in the Eric Caton report. The midwife initiated the move to approach the nursing colleges and ask if they would be open to amalgamate together. And the podiatrists did the same with the College of Physician and Surgeon. So there were two additional amalgamation in the year of 2020. First one, the College of Physician and Surgeon of BC, as I said, who took on the podiatrists. The name of the organization did not change as a result of that amalgamation. And then in September 2020, the BC College of Nursing Professional became the BC College of Nursing and Midwife, regulating 3 nursing profession and midwifery. And then after that, the 4 oral health profession, also as a volunteered amalgamation, approached government in saying that they would be willing to pursue and do this work. It was also part of the recommendation already in the government report, but they took the initiative of seeking government support to start this work, and they completed their amalgamation in September 2022. And we are the last 2, but not the least, because we are the 2 largest amalgamation in the province in terms of combining a number of organizations together. So the College of Health and Care Professional, we've just mentioned, but there's also our colleagues who are completing their amalgamation also on June 28th, the College of Complementary Health Professional, who will regulate naturopathic physician, massage therapists, acupuncturist and traditional Chinese medicine, and chiropractor. So the transition approach that we took for this amalgamation was very different than the others before us, mostly because our amalgamation was directed by government and was not a volunteered one. So in December 2022, government came back in confirming that they were ready for this group to move forward and start the work. And at that point, we kind of had a high level direction that the grouping were going to remain the same as what was in the government steering committee recommendation. And they had also talked about a 2024 timeline, but we had not been given a firm time. In 2023, early 2023, we focused on the governance model of this amalgamation because, again, it was quite unique and different as opposed to the one before us who were involving a smaller number of organizations. And we didn't think it was going to be feasible to have 11 boards coming together at the table and trying to make a decision. So we agreed to use the Health Profession Act provision, which allows to have somebody appointed to have the responsibilities and roles of the board for the purpose of amalgamation, so we could have a streamlined process for decision-making. So that was a consensus decision that was done in February 2023, and then government identified the amalgamation lead in April 2023. The colleges had suggested quite a long list of criteria that we thought were important for the amalgamation lead to have in order for that person to be successful and efficient in that role. And ministry took the time to go around and select someone that were meeting those criteria. Because it was a directed amalgamation too, and also a smaller to medium organization, there was confirmation that there was going to be funding for this amalgamation, which was different than others who were volunteered and actually fully funded by the colleges. And then in July 2023, we had the actual ministerial order confirming the power of the amalgamation lead. And we were also confirmed that the amalgamation needed to be completed on June 28th, which was giving us about 11 months to complete 2 amalgamations like in parallel together coming at the end of June 28th. So the summer last year was spent on developing what we call the roadmap. So really what we needed to complete in terms of milestone, what we have called repeatedly over the last months of our must-have. So what we absolutely needed to have those organizations up and running with no disruption of services in terms of regulating these professions and answering the public. And then once we received that report, the amalgamation lead took some time to think about what would be the most efficient project governance in order to deliver those milestones in those 9 months that we had. And that is when there was the establishment of the Chief Transition Officer position and also a team of transition lead with specific work stream that would be dedicated to work on area of the amalgamation, for example, finance, legal, all of the regulatory function, communication, change management. And so that September was spent on that. My appointment was confirmed. And then October and November were spent on recruiting all of the project structure, the service provider that we needed, because obviously we required a lot of external support to be doing this. So from project management to legal services to financial advisor, et cetera, et cetera. And then we populated the 14 work stream with mostly internal staff from all of the organization. So really making sure that the people were the contributor to shaping up what those two new organizations should be. Diane will speak, I think, a little bit about the CEO approach later on, but in January, we had both of the CEOs for the future organization appointed, which was, again, a bit different than the prior organization, where the CEOs were appointed really in the lead up to amalgamation, so this month, for example. But the amalgamation lead chose to initiate the recruitment quite early on so that the CEO could be involved in the organization. And then this past April, we actually reached out to government to ask for additional funding. I'll touch on it very quickly in terms of total amount later. But we were successful in getting additional money to complete amalgamation for our legal day one. Oh, is that me? I thought it was going to be you. Okay, I said Diane was going to speak about this, but it's me. Yeah, so the CEO recruitment took place between October and January. It was an international search. A firm was mandated to do this. There was over 120 applicants, from which there was a short list selected by the selection committee, which was comprised of the amalgamation lead and representative of each boards. So the current boards participated into that process. And then they were appointed in January. So the CEO's role were part-time between February until now. And the goal was really to allow them to be focused on all of the HR decision that needs to be made. So developing the organizational structure, the job description, all of the compensation related items such as benefit, retirement, and making sure that they could contribute to building a culture and supporting change as we're getting ready to transition into this new organization. And also in parallel, the board and committee recruitment also happened in the first part of this year. So the first portion of the work was to develop a governance framework, which we would be more than happy to make available to anyone who's interested, which kind of laid out what should be the board composition, some principle regarding what we want governance to achieve, what is important to us. It spoke to reconciliation and other factors, and we were able to develop a composition matrix based on that. So the board of the new college will have 12 people, 50% professional and 50% public member. But which means in the case of this college, there's not a representative of each profession necessarily at the board level, because there's 9 professions being regulated on June 28th and only 6 professional seats. There was an expression of interest that was launched only with existing board member. It was a policy decision that we already had a large pool of people who were already doing governance role, and that for continuity, it would be easier to have people who have knowledge of the regulation of these profession and regulation of profession in general. And so those who were asked to submit an expression of interest were already existing board members. And then after receiving the application, there was a consultation with colleges, a little bit as a vetting process, making sure that we would recommend people that are in line with the composition matrix and the governance framework. And then there was a list of recommendations that went to the Minister of Health, because with the Health Profession Act, the first board of the colleges need to be fully appointed. So those appointments actually came back just fresh a week ago about that. And so that's an important milestone that's been completed. We're happy to talk about it later, maybe if you guys have questions about what was the result. And we did the same with committees. The only difference is that obviously it's not the minister who appointed the committees. So the committees were appointed by the amalgamation lead in his role of the equivalent of a board. But we followed the same process. We asked existing committee members who are part of the colleges, and then we did an exercise of consulting the colleges, making sure we were fulfilling our composition matrix and had enough people to start with, because those committees are becoming quite large as they are multi-profession and will be working in panels. Okay, this is my last slide, and I feel like I will have talked enough. Just talking a little bit about money. I think people have asked us about this, and we're being quite transparent, especially because it has been fully funded from government to date. So the first phase that I've talked earlier, which was in February 2023, which was regarding coming together and deciding what was going to be the governance model for this amalgamation, cost us about $50K. The phase 2, which was the last summer work, where we mapped our roadmap of what we were going to deliver, our must-have for legal day 1, came in about $830K. And then the phase 3 is the implementation, which is the work that has happened between September and which will lead us all the way up until June 28th, so in 2 weeks from now, which will be about, I kind of rounded it up because I can't predict exactly what our June expense will be, but we're anticipating to come between 4.3 and 4.5 million. For the 2 amalgamations. So just want to point that out because we've done both of them in parallel. So those are the costs for the 2. And this is coming in actually quite good because the nursing amalgamation that was done was around those number 2. And it was only for 1 amalgamation. And we will have done this at the same cost for 2 much more complex amalgamation. And so we are having what we call a phase 4, which is what Diane will be doing June 28th and onward, which is the remaining of the important work of integration. And we're waiting for confirmation of additional funding. We have asked government to support this and are hopeful that there's going to be some money provided for the colleges to continue this transition.
Okay, thanks. And hi, everyone. And thanks to Rich and team for inviting us to talk about this amalgamation journey today with a physical therapy audience. So I'm going to just share briefly what will stay the same on legal day 1, what work we have to do, what some of the concerns are, and the realities that we're facing in this amalgamation. Just in terms of following up on Giovanni's comments about funding, I think the other piece is that the existing colleges, so with the College of Health and Care Professionals of British Columbia, there are 9 professions and 7 colleges. So 1 college, speech and hearing, their regulator regulates 3 professions: audiology, speech language, and hearing instrument practitioners. And all of those colleges and professions have contributed a huge amount of volunteer time. So when Giovanni spoke about the work streams, those were all populated by subject matter experts across the colleges at no cost to the project. So I don't know that we can ever calculate those hours, but there's a tremendous amount of goodwill and volunteerism that's gone into this as well, which has been great in that there's lots of great subject matter experts, but also incredibly challenging for colleges that needed to continue doing the day-to-day work of regulating professions, on top of planning for amalgamation. So I'll start with just, before I get to infrastructure, just what will be the same. So one thing is a scope of practice across the 9 professions will be the same. In our legislative, we've got the slides out of order. In our legislative model, scope of practice is actually defined in legislation, in regulations specifically. So at this point in time, the scope of practice for each of the professions has been untouched. There are some some other aspects of regulation, like we have a restricted activities model across many jurisdictions in Canada where, high risk activities are identified. There's some tweaking to some of that that's happening right now, but generally the rules under which we exist and govern will remain the same. A number of profession-specific requirements will remain the same on legal day one. So all the entry to practice requirements across the professions will stay the same, as will quality assurance programs and standards of practice, ethical expectations. We're not touching those to start with, but I'll speak later about the work that is to come around some of that. But on legal day one, the plan is to have everything sort of status quo. And in part, that's because there just hasn't been a lot of time to actually look at a whole lot of integration around some of the regulatory program streams in particular. And a lot of the technology and systems that people are using now will stay the same. So the biggest one is our CRM, our database. We have, I think, 5 different databases across these professions. And it's, as you can appreciate, it's quite a large project to actually develop or moved in the direction of actually having one database across these professions. We're fortunate in this particular college going forward that 3 of us share one data system. And so it might be that we have a bit of an easier transition from 5 to 1, but we're not there yet. Records management, another big area that we just haven't had time to really start digging into and figure out how we're going to manage records or information management across this organization. And lots of the software will remain the same. The other pieces that will remain the same, staffing. So the amalgamation lead that Joanne spoke to made a promise to all of the existing staff in the colleges, with the exception of the registrars. So the equivalent, I guess, in the US of the CEOs of the regulators. They were not promised jobs, but all of the staff were promised jobs as well, or the promise was that they would be offered a role. Whether they choose to accept it or not is a different question, but they have all been offered the promise of a job. And the other thing is the legislation allows for existing committees. So for example, a conduct or inquiry committee or a registration committee, they are able to continue post legal day one to finish off any business that they actually started prior to June 28th, which is the date of amalgamation or legal day one. Yeah, so next slide, Joanne. So the infrastructure. Our office location, we actually, across these colleges, we have 4 different physical locations. 3 are in the Vancouver area and 1 is in Victoria. A number of us now, we co-locate in an existing space that's known as the Regulatory Hub. It's actually the parent is the BC College of Nurses and Midwives. They sublease space to a number of us. So that is going to be the primary office for in Vancouver for the colleges that will regulate, or the professions that we regulate, and we will maintain 1 office on Vancouver Island in Victoria, which is now the home of the College of Occupational Therapists, but it will become sort of a Vancouver Island hub. And the other 2 spaces in Vancouver, I will inherit a condo and in an office tower. We'll keep that for a period of time, and the other is leased, and we will try and sublease it. So the intention is to have 1 primary space in Vancouver and 1 primary space on Vancouver Island in Victoria, where the government actually is located. We're very much across these organizations a remote or a hybrid workforce, and that will continue. There are a few people that come into the office on a daily basis. There are a small number that are 100% remote. So our investigators, for example, that don't need to be in the office, but the majority are hybrid. So they're in a few days a week. We have a number of services that we're sharing. So within our hub space, all the furniture is provided, all the hardware is going to be provided, laptops, printers, telephones, all those kinds of things. And we're also purchasing shared services from the BC College of Nurses and Midwives. They currently provide many of us with IT services, including all of the IT functions, security, et cetera. And Joanie has negotiated an agreement with them that they will continue to provide us with those services. Facility services like mail, kitchen, all of that, as well as reception services. So really, those of us who have been living in the hub will continue to experience really the same. And those coming into the hub will benefit from having a lot more infrastructure than what they have in their existing facilities for some of them, for sure. So what's the work to come? There's a lot. If you think back to Joanne's comments on the time frame, we really started in earnest to plan amalgamation in January. So that's when work streams were appointed. I was appointed based on a 2-day-a-week CEO secondment in the end of February. So we just haven't had a lot of time to actually move towards where we would like to be, which is certainly more integration. So there's a lot of financial integration that has to happen. We will commission a fee structure review over the summer so that we can get to a place where we have a more consistent fee structure across the professions. The range now for annual fees, which I know is very different than for many of you, is $500 to about $1,400 across these professions. And so we're actually going to come up with or we're hoping to come up with a model anyway, where there's sort of a core administrative fee, and then there will be a fee adjustment based on risk and other factors by profession. So that's a big piece of work. The CRM integration is a longer term project. It's probably 18 months to 24 months before we'll actually be able to do that. And we need funding also to actually start that project. Lots and lots of regulatory transformation work to do on the regulatory program. So I don't think we don't have a vision where we're going to completely, implode existing regulation and transform everything across regulatory programs. But we do think that there's opportunities to actually integrate and harmonize a number of functions that we have. So common complaints functions, some common standards of practice or even ethical expectations, some commonality in terms of quality assurance requirements or professional practice support. And so we do have a small team that is being put together to actually lead some of the planning around regulatory transformation. And hopefully we'll actually see some efficiencies and maybe effectiveness that comes from that work. Records management integration. I just know from my own college, we've had a records management project on the go for probably 4 years, and we're not finished yet. It's actually a massive undertaking. And so we recognize that there's going to be a need to actually be able to access records, manage them, file them, do all the things that you need to do with records so that it is a more integrated system. So that is another big project. We're trying to put together an information management team to do that. Lots of human resources and operational stabilization that needs to be done, because many of these colleges are quite small. I'm not inheriting a large HR or operations team. A lot of that work in existing colleges is either done by contractors or it's done on some occasions off the side of individuals' desks. And so there are some significant gaps in operations, in particular HR, finance, and legal that we need to try and fill and actually bring more stability to those particular operations. And then we also need to really figure out what is it we need in terms of actually continuing with this transition and support for the first 6 to 12 months. We're kind of looking at shorter term horizons for now before we get to a longer term plan. The other thing that we need to do is obviously get the board up to speed. So get them onboarded and oriented. They're going to be even something that seems as simple as they're going to use a new software platform to actually be able to manage their meetings and the materials and things like that. So there's some training that needs to be done. The board will meet on June 25th for the first time. So that's underway right now. And we also have a lot of committee orientation to plan for. In our college, we have, last count, a total of 176 individual committee members that we need to onboard and get oriented for their new roles. So there's lots of work to come. So on June 28th, the date of amalgamation, we will have new bylaws in place. Those are legal bylaws that a legal team have drafted. They're actually out again for the second round of consultation, now public consultation, but they will be finalized, and they really give us the rules under which we need to work. We will have a new website. That's the URL there. It's probably not the ideal website, but it is a website that will have a common public register, a common complaint form, and some from the user experience. They won't really know what's in the back end of it, but we do still have a lot of work to do, I think, on the website. New phone numbers, fax numbers, emails, etc. That's all in the works now. We have a new brand. You can actually see the brand on the bottom of the slides that we just had a marketing company that actually does a lot of work in terms of mergers and amalgamations help us with. They also helped with the naming of the college. The name of the college was not one that we really wanted to see in place. However, it was ultimately a decision of the Ministry of Health to name it Health and Care Professionals. We're not sure that it is that clear to the public what that means. However, it is what we need to live with. And while we have a new organizational structure, we certainly have a new leadership team. So we have a chief regulatory officer that's responsible for regulatory programs. We have a number of executive directors, and then underneath in the various areas, we have directors, managers, and then a number of staff. And most of the staff that are doing the work will actually continue to do the work that they've been doing for some time. So again, we're trying to give the staff time to pause, continue doing what they are used to do in their day-to-day work until we actually start moving towards harmonization and integration. So I know the HR part of this and the change management is probably being the hardest part. People are very anxious about their roles. Who are they going to report to? What are their new teams going to look like? And actually this week, at the end of this week, they will get more information about what that looks like for them at an individual level. It's actually been quite a complex project to put together the organizational structure, given that we needed to fit individuals into a new structure. If I could do it over again, I would actually be I think my preference would be to actually develop the structure and then figure out, okay, what kind of staffing do you need to actually populate that, as opposed to having to kind of do those two things at once, figuring out the structure, but really needing to figure out where people are going to land. So it was a very large puzzle. So what are the concerns? Very much still a lot of concern about the loss of professional identity. So it comes up time and time and time again. And I know I have relied upon our friends at APRA and others that have gone through this process to reassure me that it really won't be as bad as people think, that the profession specific expertise still needs to live in multidisciplinary regulators. But there is a lot of concern about that, and a lot of concern given that the board in particular will not represent all 9 professions. And so those professions that are not represented are very concerned even though it is a competency-based board, it is not a representative board, but that is a big shift in culture here. So that's a really significant issue to manage. The loss of profession-specific expertise. So I spoke to the board, but also in terms of professional practice support. So we have a whole team of under quality practice. These are individuals that provide professional practice support. And while I think the vision is that there's probably professional practice support that you can give across professions, there is a need to still maintain that individual profession-specific expertise. And so there is a lot of anxiety around people believing that that will be lost, even though we do have practice advisors, for example, from all the professions that will move over, and they'll continue to provide that support. You know, there's a lot of our way is the best way, and that's come up a lot in the work streams. So that's been something that the work stream leads and Joanne has really had, they've had to manage is, I think, being thoughtful about the fact that we all believe the way we do what we do is best. You know, being open to listening and to new ideas and to think outside the box of this is an opportunity to modernize regulation and how might we do that. But that has been quite challenging actually in the work stream work and in doing things like process mapping, where if you've been doing something the same for 25 years, it's really hard to think about, man, maybe there's another way to do it. And so that's been a challenge. Another concern is this is a lot of change for people, and especially people that like to work in regulation, I think even more so. And so it is a lot of change in a short period of time. We have had a great change management support. We've had a team of consultants that have worked with staff, that have worked with leaders on change. And so we've had, I don't know that we could have had more support around it, but it is still incredibly difficult for staff to manage change, all the anxiety that comes with this, and the transitions that this brings in terms of their personal and professional life. So really sensitive to that going forward, that we need to give people some permission to just take a breath and get used to this new organization. And then lots and lots of concerns around the human resource details. So not only what I mentioned, and what's my job, who am I going to report to, who am I going to work with, what's my salary going to be? The amalgamation lead promised everyone that their salary would be no less than what they were being paid in their legacy college. What are my benefits? What is my retirement plan? All of those kinds of things that are really important details to individuals. In addition, you know, Joanne mentioned the Health Professions and Occupations Act. So this is a new massive piece of legislation that is being implemented in British Columbia. And it is, we don't actually have an in-force date yet, but we're anticipating it will be March of 2025. So on top of all this amalgamation, staff are going to have to learn a whole new legislative framework with many, many, many changes in it. I think there are 627 articles or something like that in this new piece of legislation. It's a massive undertaking. And so to think about amalgamation plus pending legislation and what that means to all their processes when they're just getting used to new processes in the context of amalgamation is a challenge. And another is just what it means for those professions that have national alliances. So, you know, something like the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy in the US and others around the global community, will there be support for individual professions to continue to participate in their national alliances? What happens to, you know, their interactions or interdependencies between those organizations who provide credentialing services, for example, or examination services, or whatever other services you might get from your, you know, collaborative national groups. So there is some concern about that. I think from a leadership perspective, there is tremendous support for that kind of collaboration and work to continue, but it comes with issues around funding and agreements and fairness and transparency. So there are definitely some issues to sort out. So Joanne and I were musing on what are the top learnings from this. This is a short list. I think there are probably lots more, but I think one of the things that that I have learned is you really need the right expertise at the table to do this work well. And I would say that includes people that have expertise in amalgamations or mergers. So people that have done it before are really helpful in terms of identifying what are those must-haves, what are the nice-to-haves, how do you develop the work plans, what's the project management structure, those kinds of things are, it's not what we do in our day jobs. And so you really need that level of expertise at the table. The subject matter experts that we've had certainly bring that context and that day-to-day, regulatory experience. But it really was, we hired Deloitte for the first piece of work that Joanne talked about last year, and then a different project management consulting firm to help us. And so you really need those people at the table. The other thing is that employees who have been better prepared for amalgamation by their legacy colleges, whatever that looks like for them, whether it's change management or leadership support or, planning for career development and professional development, are doing much better with the change than those that, have come, I would say, kicking and screaming to the table to say, we don't like anything about this. And so that's been another significant observation for us, that we're, even to this day, we're still experiencing some of that I think there are some that probably hope that on June 27th, somebody decides not to do this. And so that is challenging for employees. The other thing, we know that we need ongoing support post legal day one. That it's actually a scary thought to think on June 27th at 11:59, the tap is going to be cut off for all of the support that we've had from, the project managers and people like Joanne and the amalgamation lead. The amalgamation lead actually has been appointed the chair of the new board, so that's a good thing. But we do know that we need support in terms of continuing the transition. And again, that comes with funding needs. And so we're hoping to get some additional funding to continue that support. So it's not on the backs of our licensees, because that is our only funding source. And I guess the other thing is that this amalgamation is certainly unique in Canada. There was no playbook for this to amalgamate 9 professions. We've learned a lot from the other professions in British Columbia that have gone before us, but it's a really interesting challenge to amalgamate 9 professions that are quite disparate. It's not like oral health, where they're often working in teams in the same sort of environment. This is a very different and unique group of professions. And I mentioned this earlier, but many of these organizations were small to medium. Physical therapy is the largest organization in this group. And so many have limited, internal resources, which leaves some significant internal gaps for us on legal day one. And, because we're not a legal entity until day one, there are some just challenges hiring staff at this point in time into the new organization. So, we've got some workarounds with respect to that, but we really can't start filling a lot of those gaps until we exist as a legal entity. So, yeah, so those are some of our top learnings. Joanne, I don't know if you have any others to add to that.
Oh, I think you've hit the right one, as we've discussed. And I think there's going to be a lot more learning over the summer. Yeah. So we are ready to hopefully continue a little bit the discussion with everybody. I think I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Oh, very good. Well, thank you. This is Stephen, and I'll ask the first question while anybody else is synthesizing their question. What an amazing bunch of detail and a description of change management. Certainly, this is a project of that to the nth degree on that. It reminded me of a quote by Socrates where, the secret to change is to focus not on fighting the old, but to building the new, and for that. So my question is what's your biggest anticipated hurdle that you foresee that you'll need to overcome? Is it infrastructure funding, or is it perhaps the dragging along of those interpersonal, weights that are holding professions or people back in terms of the particularities to change and to fully integrate this model. So what's your biggest anticipated hurdle that you have?
There's a few, Stephen, but I would say one out of the gate is funding. So the funding that we're going into this with is limited. And going forward, our funding source, annual fees or registration fees from licensees.
And graduation.
And so I think until we actually get to a place where we have a better sense of what the funding model is, I actually think we're going to be challenged to actually accomplish some of the things that we would really like to accomplish. I don't think we can overcome it, but I think that going into it, that's a big hurdle. I think one of the other challenges will be, it might not be a challenge. I think one of the things that, I think about and that keeps me up some nights is just the staff and how to support them through this change. We're hoping that the majority of staff will make a choice to continue because of how this amalgamation is structured. It's actually a continuation of employment from legacy colleges into this new college, but people do have a choice, right, in terms of whether they want to move or not. And so we're certainly hoping that staff will move over, but they may choose not to. It might just be more than they want to undertake at this point in time. So I think that could be another challenge. We already know that we have lots of gaps. And so to have additional gaps, especially in the regulatory programs, I think will be really, really challenging. But I would say the sorting out the funding and ensuring that we have enough funding to do what we need to do is probably, I think, one of the bigger hurdles. I don't know, Joannie, what you think?
Where my mind went is that, I think people are really seeing June 28th as the end, when really this is the beginning. What we've done really in those past months is kind of glued up those colleges together, and that they're, kind of go like good enough to start, but we haven't really amalgamated these colleges. And that's really the work that needs to happen after, because otherwise the actual purpose or intent and goal of doing amalgamation is never going to materialize. And so I think that's going to be really the biggest challenge, and that you need money for that, because it requires a lot of time and effort. And then the other piece I was thinking to, back to the HR piece that we didn't spend a ton of time discussing, but Diane did say that physical therapy was the largest organization in this group, is that most of these organizations were quite flat because they were small. And so meaning that most people are used to be either quite independent in their role or directly reporting to the highest level of leadership. And as we're combining, we are verticalizing the organization quite a bit. And that's another huge change, that now people may have 2 or 3 people above them. And for some people, this is a significant change in their identity, right? Their work is their use, they value the status that they have. And so it's a really, how they're going to have to work now is quite differently. And we need that in a bigger organization. So I think that's going to be a challenge over the summer to make that shift, which is an additional one to all of the rest, is that now I'm working with a team, and I'm not going to be knocking on Diane's door every day to be asking question. I may have to go through to 2 other person. And so I think there's a perception that maybe it's not going to be as agile as it used to be. And so what are the impact of that is some question we're hearing, which I think we need time to kind of experience that and see what it's going to happen. So, yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you. Feel free to type a question or 2 in the chat, or unmute yourself and ask a question if you want to do so directly to our speakers. Let's see. So one question is I can imagine the future includes a greater consistency across professionals of standards and of public safety. Any comments yet, or too early to know?
Yeah, great question. Yes, I think there is a desire to have more consistency and harmonization of standards of practice, ethical expectations, some of the guidelines and things across professions. Actually, with the Health Professions and Occupations Act, there is a new superintendent that is a senior role to oversee the regulators in British Columbia. And one of the things that is assigned to the superintendent is to ensure that there is some consistency across professions about things like standards and ethical expectations and so on. But that is not resonating well with a lot of the professions, especially those that are involved in quality assurance and professional practice support and that sort of thing, where again, they're very much of the view that their profession is unique and therefore there is no way that I'll make uninformed consent standard could be the same across professions, or confidentiality or something like that. And it's interesting when you look across the range of these professions. I don't know what the minimum number is, but in physical therapy, right now we have 21 separate standards. There is one profession that has over 300. And so that's a huge gap. That's huge disparity. And so when we actually have a regulatory transformation officer that's being appointed, that some of you will know. It's actually Susan Paul, who's a physical therapist by background, whose job it is going to be to actually try and bring some consistency to standards of practice to start with, and also ethical expectations. But it's another pretty significant change management exercise and I think the proof will be, once this happened. I know I've talked a lot to Paul Shinkfield from Opera about, their early journey. And I know that at the end of the day, Paul reassures me that we are more common than we are different. And therefore, we should be able to get to a place where there will be some common standards, and there probably is lots of good reason for why you need some profession specific standards, but there's hope that we'll get there.
Very good. I think we have time for one more comment. Mr. Richard Wolf. Yes.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Usually when you see combination, it's done for various reasons. I don't know if it's so much here, but usually there's efficiencies in the whole process, right? But it sounds like the number of bodies, we only may have lost the top position unless people through attrition decide to step away. Do you have any sense of like the size of the staff from all the individual to now your amalgamated staff? What's changed between that? And then the second one is relationships. You talked about international relationships, but much like physical therapy has got the Canadian Alliance, right? And they've every single profession's probably got a licensing body, maybe others that they're dealing with on a national level. How do you establish and maintain those relationships, especially when you've got so many different professions and you may not even have a professional represented on the board?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to your first question, Rich, there are very few people that are in the group that are not being offered a role. So it's really just the registrars, of which there were a total of 11, and the majority are choosing or have been, they will have roles. So the staff complement will be very similar to the collective. So we're starting out with about 65 or 68. We have a few people on leave, et cetera, but in that range. We do know from the other professions here that have amalgamated that they have, in some cases, almost doubled their staff. Like multidisciplinary regulation is expensive and you need people to do it. So we're starting out with, who we have, knowing that we need to fill positions. And I think we could grow substantially. That would be my sense to that one. On the National Alliance question, yeah, it's a good, and that is a fear, right? People are worried about what will happen with those relationships. I mean, I can't sit at 9 National Alliance tables and make sense of it all. It's just not possible. And so we are looking at my goal would be to maintain those relationships and figure out who makes the most sense to attend those meetings, right? And I think it's profession-specific expertise, depending on what the role of those national organizations. If it's all policy related, maybe it could be a leader. If it's around, I don't know, assessments, maybe somebody that works in licensure. So we've collected that information, and there are lots of other external committee, representation things that we need to think about as well. It's not just the national bodies. So, various provincial committees or even national committees that are outside of sort of the context of our alliance or your federation and others around the world. So we need to figure some of that out. We have figured it out in the short term for the fall or for the summer and kind of into the fall where meetings are happening, who will attend. But in the longer term, we need to figure out what that will look like. I mean, I think the good news is we have enough individuals on the staff that we will be able to actually provide support for people to continue in those various roles. It's unlikely to be at the board or at the committee level.
Very good. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Are there any other further questions? Well, Joanne and Diane, I want to thank you. This was a very great presentation. Very much appreciated. This is audacious work, and I am personally looking forward to seeing your successes. So thank you very much for today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you.
Thanks.